National Institutes of Health have a new director, one with vision.
It's the kind of vision, I think, that points to a future where the American people trust us again, and the scientific results translate into improvements in health and well-being for every single American, no matter who you are.
Defined goals.
My goal is to foster a culture where scientists can express disagreement respectfully. I might end up agreeing with you. That's the beauty of it. The key way to always be right, when you're wrong, just change your mind.
And a bold reform agenda.
Science advances when you take risks. So we have to de-risk and expand transformative research. It means we have to be tolerant of failure. We punish failure too harshly. That has to end.
Meet our nation's new top biomedical scientist and discover his blueprint for the future of biomedical research inside this edition of CTSI Discovery Radio. Welcome to CTSI Discovery Radio. I'm your host, Brian Belmer. CTSI Discovery Radio is brought to you by the Clinical and Translational Science Institute of Southeast Wisconsin. The CTSI is a consortium of researchers, doctors, scientists, and others representing 8 institutions, including the Medical College of Wisconsin, Milwaukee School of Engineering, Marquette University, the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, Children's Wisconsin, Froedtert Hospital, Versity Blood Center of Wisconsin, and the Zablocki VA Medical Center. The CTSI works collaboratively across all of our member institutions. Our mission is advancing health through research and discovery. On May 2nd, 2025, the Medical College of Wisconsin was privileged to host our nation's newly appointed 18th Director of the National Institutes of Health. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya visited MCW as part of the President's Speaker Series in sharing his vision for leading America's biomedical research enterprise. His agenda as NIH Director is clear, bold, aimed at reform, and while you may agree with all or only some of it, what's important is for us to hear it. So today we will. Let's listen in as the event begins with introductory remarks from Medical College of Wisconsin Executive Leadership.
My name is Dr. John Raymond. I'm the president of Medical College of Wisconsin. This event is co-sponsored by the Wisconsin Association of Scholars, along with the Medical College of Wisconsin's Presidential Speaker Series. Dr. Benjamin Whitcomb, president of the Wisconsin Association of Scholars, thank you for being here and for co-sponsoring this. Now, I would ask Dr. Whitcomb to share a few words on behalf of the Wisconsin Association of Scholars.
Bringing Dr. Benjamin Whitcomb to the podium.
The Wisconsin Association of Scholars is a state affiliate of the National Association of Scholars, which is an organization whose mission is to support a liberal arts education. The standards of a liberal arts education that the NAS upholds include reasoned scholarship and civil debate in America's colleges and universities, individual merit in academic and scholarly endeavor. We expect that ideas be judged on their merits, that scholars engage in the disinterested pursuit of the truth, and that colleges and universities provide for fair and judicial examination of contending views. We uphold the principles of academic freedom that include faculty members and students' freedom to pursue academic research, their freedom to question and to think for themselves, and their freedom from ideological imposition. WAS is delighted to be co-sponsoring today's talk along with MCW, and I would particularly like to thank Dr. John Raymond, who will now introduce Dr. Bhattacharya.
Once again, Medical College of Wisconsin President, Dr. John Raymond.
We're so delighted to welcome as our guest speaker, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, the 18th Director of the United States National Institutes of Health, who began his tenure on April 1, and we're lucky to have you here. He is our country's chief biomedical scientist and the thought leader for the direction of our biomedical research enterprise. He earned his bachelor's and master's degrees in economics from Stanford University and completed medical school and earned his PhD in economics also from Stanford. He's a renowned physician, researcher, and health economist, and he held a tenured professorship in the medical school at Stanford, where his research is focused on population aging and chronic diseases, particularly on the health and well-being of vulnerable populations. He's published more than 170 research papers in high-quality peer-reviewed journals in medicine, epidemiology, health policy, economics, statistics, science policy, public health. He was a co-author of the Great Barrington Declaration early in the COVID-19 pandemic, and he has been and continues to be a strong advocate for open scientific inquiry. Additionally, Dr. Bhattacharya is a longtime NIH grant recipient, and he served as a standing member of multiple NIH peer-reviewed committees. And with that, I will turn the podium over to our distinguished guest.
Dr. J. Bhattacharya begins his presentation titled A Blueprint for the Future of Biomedical Research.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Raymond, and to the Medical College of Wisconsin. I'm always going to remember you all because this is the first university talk that I've given since I have had this crazy job for the last 30 days. It's very, very important that I start by saying that the NIH remains committed to supporting the biomedical infrastructure of this country. And it's in the medical schools and the universities of this country where the vast bulk of that work gets done.
Which is why he agreed to speak on campus in the first place.
Because I wanted to convey that as a starting point of this discussion. And I wanted to give some sense of the vision. And Wisconsin in particular is a state that's been very successful at garnering NIH money and has a long history of great accomplishments in biomedicine. And I would love to have that continue into the future. In fact, I know it will.
To illustrate his point, Dr. Bhattacharya shared a graphic reporting that Wisconsin has nearly 1,200 active NIH-supported projects with over $740 million in funding.
Okay, so I started with the stuff that I thought would be fun and good and everyone would be happy about, but I have to set up the vision that I have for the reforms agenda that I have in mind, that I think, at least I hope, that everybody can get behind.
And with that disclosure, he begins laying out his reform agenda.
I need to go back 5 years to the pandemic. And it's painful to revisit it, but it's very, very important to revisit it to understand why we are at this moment where so many changes to the American biomedical research enterprise are taking place all at once.
Dr. Bhattacharya subtitles this portion of his presentation, The Failed U.S. Response to COVID, adding that he
intentionally put the word failed U.S. response to COVID because by any measure it is failed.
He provides evidence to back his claim.
These are estimates from different countries of cumulative age-standardized excess mortality. That's a mouthful. Let me just say what that means. You take all of the deaths that occurred in a particular country, you ask if there had not been a pandemic based on mortality data from 2017 to 2019, if we had that same mortality profile, what would have been expected? And you ask if all countries had the same age distribution in population, how many excess deaths did you actually have during the pandemic relative to what would have been expected?
The answer may surprise you.
The country that had negative all-cause excess mortality through the pandemic is Sweden. Striking. If you recall, at the beginning of the pandemic, Sweden was seen as the worst of the worst.
Striking because, if you recall, Sweden
didn't close schools. They didn't mandate the COVID vaccine. They didn't mandate masking. They recommended people stay home from work if they could, but provided support for people who couldn't. They didn't close restaurants. And it's striking because what they didn't do, nevertheless, resulted in this tremendous success where they had the best all-cause ages excess deaths in all of Europe. If the idea was which country was the best at protecting human life in Europe during the pandemic, the answer is Sweden.
He debunks one theory as to why.
I've seen people talk about these numbers and say, well, look, Sweden has an excellent universal healthcare system. But then so do basically all of the Western European countries. So that can't be the explanation.
And compared to the U.S.,
at the very least, what we can say is that the kind of policies that the United States adopted, closing schools, mandating vaccines, masking toddlers, none of those were necessary to achieve the lowest all-cause excess deaths in all of Europe.
So what about in the U.S.? Dr. Bhattacharya uses 3 states, Florida, California, and Wisconsin, to illustrate his point.
I chose the 3 because I was an advisor to Governor Ron DeSantis during the pandemic for the Florida response. I lived in California, so my kids didn't go to school for a year and a half. and Wisconsin because I'm in Wisconsin.
Looking at a comparison of cumulative age-standardized excess mortality rates in these three states during the pandemic,
What you can see is that early in the pandemic, by January 2021, California already had the highest all-cause excess deaths. There's some back and forth in 2021, but by 2022 into 2023, the pattern already struck itself out. Florida had the lowest age standardized all-cause excess deaths of the three states. Florida has older population, so you'd have expected them to have higher mortality. So you have to do age standardization. Wisconsin is in the middle, and California is the worst. Did you expect this?
perhaps not. But his point is,
Numbers like this cut through political ideology. Because if the key policy goal during a pandemic is to protect human life, Florida did better than California, better than Wisconsin. And by the fall of 2020, Florida had opened its schools.
findings such as this led Dr. Bhattacharya to co-author the Great Barrington Declaration.
It was a one-page document aimed at regular people. I'd been looking at statistics from around the world on collateral harms of the lockdowns. In April of 2020, the UN put out an estimate that the economic dislocations caused by the lockdowns would lead to 100 million people facing dire food insecurity. The World Bank had put an estimate out that almost 100 million people would face dire poverty as a consequence of the economic dislocation of the lockdowns. Numerous papers have borne that out.
Giving him, his co-authors, and others cause to conclude
The idea that we could lock down our societies with little cost to ourselves that would protect human life was a fantasy. The poorest people in the world could not ever afford it. And we wrote the declaration with that in mind.
But back in October of 2020,
It's not easy to dissent at that point because everybody thinks only a lockdown can work. But as someone who'd been studying the effects of poverty in poor countries on the health and well-being of vulnerable people, I felt an obligation to say, no, this is not good for the poorest people of the world. It's not good for anybody, but certainly not for the poorest.
and although the Great Barrington Declaration had its supporters,
There were many scholars and friends of mine around the world who agreed with me.
there were many who disagreed.
Within days of us writing it, I started receiving death threats. I learned later that the National Institute of Health, former director, had written an email wanting a devastating takedown of me. My own university, I faced tremendous backlash. In 2021, I was placed on a blacklist the first day that I joined Twitter.
Still, despite considerable opposition, he maintains
The reason why the United States failed during the pandemic is because we did not allow the kind of dissent that traditionally, as the United States, we always allow, right? We didn't allow free speech to happen. I'm not saying this to say I was right about everything. What I'm saying, it was absolutely necessary for medical schools and universities of this country to platform dissent during the pandemic, to platform debates about the optimal policy.
after all, as he pointed out earlier,
Sweden did it. The Swedish policy was tremendously controversial within Sweden. The Swedish health minister specifically platformed people who disagreed with him, engaged with people who disagreed with him. And there was tremendous debate in Sweden over what the right policy was. That debate was essential to the health of the population.
meanwhile, here in the US, Dr. Bhattacharya says the consequence has been
Our failure during the pandemic affects every single scientist in this country. From the Pew poll, how much confidence do US adults have in scientists to do what's best for the public? 1 in 4 Americans think our scientists don't mean good for them. And you can dismiss that and say, well, they're just wrong. The fact is, we have not just a loss of public trust in science, but in medicine as well. It's because of the pandemic that it happened. And we just have to face that reality.
However, he also sees it as an opportunity.
It's the reason why I was delighted to be able to accept this job as the director of the NIH, because I think that it's possible to get back the trust of the American people. The work that scientists do is tremendously important to the future health and well-being of every single person. But it's vital that we adopt reforms, real reforms, in the research enterprise of this country so that we depoliticize it, ground it in reality, and build a culture of respect for dissent and free speech.
Next, Dr. Bhattacharya shares his vision for the future of the NIH in 5 key points.
So first, we have to improve population health. The biomedical scientific enterprise of this country must focus on those diseases and conditions that actually affect and harm the well-being of every single American. The reality is a lot of the biomedical enterprise of this country is seen as having been politicized. Nature magazine explicitly endorsed a political presidential candidate in 2020. New England Journal of Medicine explicitly endorsed a political candidate in 2020 that almost guarantees that you're going to lose half the population.
Instead, he says,
we have to be scrupulously ecumenical. That doesn't mean you can't have political thoughts, but what it means is that in the conduct of our scientific work, we have to care for the health and well-being of every single population. And we have to address actual health needs that they have, not just the ones that we wish they didn't have.
For example, in looking again at age-standardized mortality rates in the U.S.,
from 2009 to 2019, there was almost no improvement at all in age-standardized mortality in the U.S. The mission of the NIH is to support scientific work that advances health and longevity. And from 2009 to 2019, we had no progress as far as the longevity of the American people goes.
Or another example of something plaguing our nation.
What causes autism? Why are there so many kids with autism? I've launched this program on the etiology of autism that will use the normal processes the NIH does to identify ideas, hypotheses, data sets, so that we can actually get the scientific community asking the question, why have autism rates risen so sharply in the last few decades? Have we asked that question, honestly?
Dr. Bhattacharya would suggest we have not.
The problem is that it's very difficult to ask that question. And the reason is it's taboo. What if you reach the wrong answer? Now, I personally don't believe that vaccines are the cause of autism, but there are many people in this country who disagree with me. How do you deal with that? I think the right way to deal with that is to do excellent science, to have the hypotheses and ask those questions. And that means allowing those hypotheses as actively open, even though I believe that they're not, because many other scientists don't believe that that question is closed.
So, to answer the question, why the rise in autism spectrum disorder in America?
I don't know the answer to this question. And Americans deserve an answer. And yet, it's taboo to ask this question. It shouldn't be. Scientists should be addressing the health needs of the American people without taboos.
The second key point of his agenda,
I want to ensure reliable results. It is a shocking fact that vast parts of biomedical literature are not replicable and not subject to replication. Replication is seen as secondary to the biomedical enterprise. You can't advance your career if you do it. You can't get funding for it. And if you approach somebody to try to do replication, they're going to think you're their enemy.
related to that,
We've seen high-profile instances of research fraud that have brought down very prominent people. If you see something like this, where systematically so many high-profile people commit fraud in science, it's not a moral failing that leads to that outcome. It's a systemic failure caused by the incentives of the system. And that's something the NIH has a responsibility to fix.
exasperating the issue,
This idea of publish or perish, I think, is the heart of the problem. How do you measure productivity of a scientist? We're measured by the volume of our output, and we're measured by the influence we have. What we're not measured by is, have we found results that improve the health and well-being of the American people? In biomedicine, we're too cautious. We don't take the risks we ought to take, and we essentially punish failure.
how does Dr. Bhattacharya propose ensuring reliable results in research?
The way forward is to reward replication. We have to make replication something that is an honored part of our scientific enterprise. First, we have to give high-level scientific funding to people who conduct replication. Second, high-profile scientific journals where you can put your replication work, your work on falsification, your failed results, and make them searchable in an easy way so that those failures are actually productive successes for the rest of the scientific community.
In addition,
We have to make someone being approached for replication a marker of success. If you have a scientific idea and other people in the scientific community want to engage with you to see if you're right, that's a great honor, not a threat. If you do those three things, there'll be incentives to conduct replication, places to publish it, and scientists will want to be subject to replication because that will be the measure of success.
one final measure to ensure reliable results,
We have to reduce the use of animals in research. we reached a stage where we can really start to consider real alternatives to the use of animals in research. There's been major advances, organoids, tissue chips, computational models, AI, novel systems that we're going to start to encourage as alternatives to animal use. It's good science to try to use human tissue to ask scientific questions if it is all possible to do so.
The third key point of Dr. Bhattacharya's agenda: make big advances, not take baby steps.
Incentives to work on ideas that are incremental are very strong in biomedical sciences. And the reason is very simple. We punish failure too harshly. That has to end because it turns out that the NIH, over the course of the last 4 decades, have become more and more and more conservative.
For instance,
in the 80s, NIH-funded research often relied on ideas that were 1 or 2 years old. By the mid-2010s, the typical NIH paper had ideas in it that were about 7 or 8 years old. We've become way too conservative as a profession because we're too afraid of failure.
So instead, be bold.
Science advances when you take risks. So we have to de-risk and expand transformative research. It means we have to be tolerant of failure. Rethink how we structure advances, conduct science of science, so we understand better exactly what are the structures that lead to these sort of decisions. And then finally, we have to cultivate early career talent. Make it so that we don't require endless years of postdoc before people can test their ideas out.
Fourth, on his blueprint for the future of biomedical research,
we have to maintain safety and transparency. And the research that we do should never have any risk of endangering human populations in the conduct of the research. I say this because the debate over COVID origins has been tremendously fraught. And there's a lot of people who disagree about whether it was a lab leak or whether it was natural origin. But this is not a talk about that. What I will say is that scientific work that has the potential to cause a pandemic is too dangerous to do. And it's not worth the scientific knowledge we gain from it. If it has the potential to cause a pandemic, it's not something that we should focus on.
And Dr. Bhattacharya cites an earlier historical example as precedence.
We've already made this decision, for instance, in testing of nuclear bombs, right? We have a comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty that says, no, we're not going to test nuclear weapons above ground. Who knows? Maybe it's scientifically interesting to do it, but that's not enough of a justification. And the public is not going to trust us if we don't allow them a voice in deciding what risks we can and can't take as scientists, when those risks have catastrophic effects on the lives and livelihoods of the people that fund us.
Therefore, oftentimes, it's about taking the right risks in research.
If we take risks to do research that might cause a pandemic, and that research arguably does, you can understand why the American public would say no, why the world public would say no. There's many things in science you could work on that are valuable, that don't have catastrophic risk, that don't cause 20 million deaths, trillions of dollars of expenditures, children left behind with years of schooling, a catastrophic increase in drug abuse, suicidality, depression. What knowledge is worth the risk of causing that?
The fifth key point of Dr. Bhattacharya's blueprint for the future of biomedical research:
we have to encourage academic freedom. We have to encourage free speech in our scientific community. As I said earlier, and as I opened the talk, this, I believe, was the fundamental reason why we failed during the COVID-19 pandemic. My goal is to foster a culture where scientists can express disagreement respectfully. And frankly, I welcome that. I want disagreement, respectful disagreement, and reasoning. I might end up agreeing with you. That's the beauty of it. The key way to always be right, when you're wrong, just change your mind.
Being the newly appointed 18th director of the National Institutes of Health,
the way I'm aiming to do this is by example. There was a policy, which I was very surprised to learn about when I first took the reins at the NIH, which is that intramural researchers, before they published their paper, had to go through essentially what looked like a substantive review where their supervisors could tell them, no, I don't like this result, you're not allowed to publish it. To me, at Stanford before 2020, I would have been utterly shocked by that. It's absolutely vital that scientists express their scientific ideas without that kind of control.
So, as the new NIH director,
I've ordered the NIH to adopt an academic freedom policy where scientists can publish their papers without my having to say, yes, I like it, or no, I don't like it. I don't get to say that. They can just publish their papers. They have to say that it's their own views, not the NIH's views, but whatever, that's fine.
And he says academic freedom must be the rule
if we are going to expect science to advance, because we can't have scientific taboos. Scientific taboos lead to stagnation, lead to the kind of disasters we saw during the pandemic. We have to foster a culture where scientists engage in open and academic discourse, especially if people disagree. It's frankly the only way we would ever get back public trust. If we have scientific dogma at the heart of how we think about science, oh no, I can't say that, can't think that, the public is never going to trust us. The only way forward is to allow civil disagreements to happen openly in public. Scientists disagreeing with each other and reasoning together is the best way to do science.
Finally, Dr. Bhattacharya reminds us of the NIH's mission, finding novel biomedical discoveries that enhance health and lengthen life.
That's a mission I think every single person can get behind. This is not a partisan mission, and I hope, as I've described my vision, that it's not a partisan vision. It's the kind of vision I think that points to a future where the American people trust us again, and the scientific results that the scientific community is capable of translates into improvements in health and well-being for every single American, no matter who you are. Thank you.
And with that, Dr. Bhattacharya wrapped up his formal presentation. But he wasn't done just yet, generously giving his time to field questions from the audience. First, a question about approved peer-reviewed research that's now lost its NIH funding and deprioritized.
The NIH has the obligation to focus its efforts on things that are priorities for the country. The NIH is committed now and has always been appropriately to advancing the health and well-being of every single American. The NIH cares about your health. It did before and still does. I want to distinguish that from, say, you care about the environmental influences on health. That's completely within the range of what the NIH should study and does study. If you care about the effect of climate change on environmental impacts on health, well, that's kind of removed and also politically divisive. The prioritization of the health outcomes of Americans, I think, is appropriate and good. My promise to you is that if you put your talents to the things that actually affect American health and avoid political ideology, you're going to be very successful.
Another question, this one related to transition at the NIH and its impact on the biomedical research community.
I've heard a lot of panic in the community, as if support that the federal government has for science has ended and that somehow science is no longer a priority. One of the reasons I was so delighted to be able to come here was to assure people that is not true. The scientific enterprise of this country is the best in the world. The president committed this country to being the leader in biomedicine into the 21st century. The transition period where there's changes in prioritization to depoliticize the NIH is bumpy. But the ultimate thing will be the NIH will continue to support getting excellent answers to questions. And so, yeah, just keep being an excellent scientist.
Then, a question about how public trust in autism research, especially among the autistic community, can be restored.
This autism project cannot succeed without the close collaboration with the community of autism around the country. The purpose isn't to dehumanize, the purpose is to help. So there's no lack of knowledge or empathy on the part of me or of NIH. That research that we want to do is aimed at helping you and your family and others get answers. I don't know what those answers are going to be, but I want to make it so that we can ask those questions so that you can get help. My goal is to help them. My goal is for the science to help them. The scientists that are going to work on this, by the way, are going to be people who compete for NIH grants, but I want to authorize them to answer the questions that the autism community wants answered.
And finally, an interesting question. Since autism is a spectrum, could there be benefit to having autism? Dr. Bhattacharya gives an interesting answer.
Okay, some people have called me on the spectrum. Is it beneficial? I mean, I don't know. I am who I am. But I don't think autism means that you're less of a human being. In fact, you're fully human if you're autistic. I've always thought of myself as partly on the spectrum myself. And I don't think that studying people automatically is dehumanizing. It's the question is how you do it. If it's respectful in collaboration with the community at large, you can actually advance knowledge in a humane way. That's the goal of this.
We're all out of time for this edition of CTSI Discovery Radio. We hope you've enjoyed this special edition of our show featuring insights from our new NIH director, Dr. J. Bhattacharya, and we thank him for appearing on today's show. I hope you've discovered something by listening today, and I'm doubly hopeful you'll join us again next time. CTSI Discovery Radio airs the third Friday of every month. Make an appointment on your calendar and join us for each episode. On behalf of the Clinical and Translational Science Institute of Southeast Wisconsin and all of our affiliate partners and members, I'm Brian Belmer, wishing you happier, healthier days and weeks ahead. For more information about research or to listen to the podcast of this or any of our shows on demand, please visit our website at ctsi.mcw.edu. CTSI Discovery Radio is written, produced, and hosted by Brian Belmer in collaboration with WMSE Radio. The CTSI and this program are under the direction of Dr. Reza Shakir.